You are listening to Mistletoe Kiss, a sweet Christian romance written by Andrea Boyd and narrated by MicMonster AI.
Chase, you have got to see this. The way Rachel Anthony practically danced into his office reminded Chase of the day they met, the first day of first grade. She had skipped right up to him on the playground and asked if they could be friends. If he'd known he would be permanently relegated to the friend zone, he would have said no. She leaned against his arm as she stretched over his desk. As her fingers tapped across his keyboard, her familiar floral scent surrounded him. He leaned closer and inhaled deeply. "Chase Spencer, did you just sniff me? Hey, I paid a lot for that overpriced scented water." And as far as he was concerned, it was worth every penny. It had been over a year ago, but he still remembered the way she had jumped into his arms with an exuberant squeal when she'd opened the coveted birthday gift. "Yeah, and I'm about out. You know, Christmas is right around the corner." Ray tapped him on the knee. "Scoot back. I was trying to work here." She plopped right down into his lap. The woman drove him crazy, and she didn't even have a clue. "This is more important than work. I figured out how we can get into the Guinness Book of World Records, Anne." She tucked her light brown hair behind her ear as she glanced back to add emphasis to her point. "And we can strike another amusement park from our list." She lifted two slender fingers in the air and then let one drop. Two birds, one stone. The summer they each turned 10 years old, Ray's parents had taken the two of them on a Disney vacation. After that, they made a pact to visit every amusement park in America. They had managed 15 by the time they entered college. He hadn't given it a thought since then. And the Guinness World Records thing, that had always been her dream. They had pored over the book after coming across it in the library one year. It hadn't taken long for him to realize they would never be record breakers, but Ray would never let go of the idea. "I heard about it on the radio just now. It's all happening at Six Flags, and as you know, the one in Georgia is not that far away. We could so do this. Don't you think?" Ray leaned to the left so he could look at the website she had pulled up on his monitor. Chase couldn't get past the title at the top of the screen. He sat frozen in place until she elbowed him in the gut. "Can you see the screen? What do you think?" It said. "Calling all couples. Sign up now. Help us set a record. On December 10th at 5 p.m. we need your help setting a Guinness World Record for the most couples kissing under the mistletoe. So, you think we could do this?" His voice came out in a higher-pitched tone. Chase swallowed hard and tried again. "I mean, do you think we can both get off work at the same time?" They began working at Windsor Designs right after college ended, just under 7 months ago. No one at the advertising agency was actually scheduled to work on Saturdays, but if you planned on going anywhere in this business, you had better be there. And the last couple of months had been brutal. None of it mattered. As always, he'd do whatever it took to be able to do this with her. Ray bounced against his knees. "According to Sandy, all this work we've been doing will drop off dramatically come the 1st of December. We should be free by then. It'll be my treat. The park opens at 3:30. We can leave early on Saturday and get there in plenty of time. I'll find us a place to crash that night, and we'll be back in time for Sunday night church services. What do you think?" Chase rubbed his chin and stared at the screen as if he had to take a moment to think it over, but in reality, he was already picturing that kiss. Had she really thought this through? His gaze shifted from the computer screen to her face. Her brows rose in question. "Well?" He allowed the corners of his lips to turn upward. "Let's do it." A few clicks of the mouse, and Ray had the ad he had been working on back up on the screen. She stood and opened her mouth to say something when someone cleared their throat right outside his door. He leaned back to see who it was just as she said, "Traveling only has one L." "What?" Chase leaned closer to the screen to where Ray pointed. "Are you sure? In some parts of the world it is acceptable to use 2 L's, but here in America we only use 1. Look it up for yourself." He would, as soon as his heart stopped racing. He was keenly aware that Jay Gossett stood at the door, and Ray had just saved them both from a reprimand with her quick thinking. What would have happened if the guy had come in 2 minutes earlier while she sat on his lap? Besides the fact Jay was his boss, the man had a thing for Ray. Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate you catching that for me. Sometimes it was hard for him to remember that she wanted to be called by her actual name at work. Said it sounded more professional. You're welcome. She turned to go. Oh, hey, Jay. She seemed to just realize the man was in the same room. Chase might be more convinced of her innocence if he didn't know her so well. Jay's eyes lit up when she spoke to him. Just the woman I hope to see. A group of us are going to Sullivan's for lunch. Would you like to join us? Smooth. He had invited her to go with him before. No doubt he hoped a group date would take a brick out of the wall she had erected between them. Can't. Too much work to do. Maybe Chase would like to join you. Thanks a lot, Ray. She smiled sweetly up at Jay as she slipped past and then threw a teasing glance over her shoulder at Chase. He'd get her back for this one.
Rachel smiled at her coworker as soon as she stepped back into their workroom. You ready for lunch? Sandy slung her purse strap over her shoulder. Sure am. Where are we going? Anywhere but Sullivan's. She slid her arms into her gray wool coat and wrapped the scarf her mom knitted to match around her neck. Sandy's brown hand went up to rest on an ample hip. Girl, you know we don't even have time for anything like that. How about Rusty's? Rachel rubbed her stomach. Sounds good. I could go for one of their Reuben sandwiches about now. She grabbed her purse, then peeked out into the hallway. Looked like the coast was clear. A chuckle escaped from under her breath at the memory of the look on Chase's face when she'd suggested he take her place for the lunch invitation. She made brisk steps to the back door. A peek outside revealed that the coast was clear here too. If they could make it to Sandy's VW Jetta without being caught, that would be great. Sandy's breath came out in short wisps. Girl, who are you running from? You act like somebody's chasing you. Slow down. Pausing, Rachel waited for her friend to come even with her. Jay asked me to lunch, and I told him I had too much work to do. Well, you didn't lie. You're still allowed to eat lunch, though. If you run into him, just tell him we're going out for a quick bite. Running around the way you've been doing only makes you look guilty. Point taken. A beep sounded when Sandy hit the button on her key fob. So, what did Chase have to say about Six Flags? He said yes. I told you he would. That boy's got it bad for you. Rachel ignored her. People had been trying to figure out her and Chase's relationship for years. Why was it so hard to believe that a guy and a girl could be good friends without it going deeper? She opened the door of the black car and slid onto the cold leather seat. I just hope you're right about us not being busy come December. I'm right about that too. You just wait and see. Sandy looked over at her. And here's another prediction. You two are heading out on your little adventure as friends, but you'll be coming back as a couple. You just mark my words, old Sandy is never wrong. Well, get ready to be wrong about that. Sandy smirked. If y'all don't come back planning a wedding, it'll be because you're holding back on him. That boy's already in love with you. Yes, he is. Rachel shook her head. No use arguing with her. Sandy would just have to wait and see it for herself. She and Chase would always be good friends and nothing more. If anything was meant to happen between them, it would have happened before now.
So what are you going to do? Chase looked up from his task at the quiet question coming from his older brother, Wade, but all he could see was the side of the black and white Holstein in front of him. During the week, he wore business attire and worked in the city. But on weekends, Chase could be found in overalls on his family's farm. The sound of milk hitting metal pails became the familiar background music to early morning conversations with his two brothers. He had a feeling the rest of his family knew how he felt about Rachel, but Wade and Zane were the only ones he would talk about it with. He hadn't hesitated to tell them about her invitation to Six Flags. I'm going, of course. Wade stood from his milking stool and carried his full pail over to the strainer. What I mean is, what are you going to do about the kiss? Do you think she's expecting a chaste kiss like one you'd give Ma, or do you think she wants something more? Like maybe she's using this as an excuse to take your friendship to the next level. She has to know how you feel about her. Chase pictured the way she looked when she'd told him about this scheme of hers and shook his head. I don't believe she does. He looked over to where Wade now stood with a pitchfork in hand, ready to muck out the stables. I looked it up. We have to hold the kiss to the count of 10. That's not the kind of kiss I'd give my mama, but I think Ray is expecting it to be nothing, like we'll go on from there and act like it never happened. It might end up happening that way for her, but it wouldn't be that way for him. He'd be in a heap of hurt when this was over and she acted like it was nothing. But what else could he do about it? If he'd have said no to this little adventure, he would be kicking himself for the rest of his life. Either way it went, it would be bad for him. The only thing that would make this worthwhile was for the kiss to bring her to the realization that they were meant to be together. Wade went to work with the pitchfork as he responded. Then you're going to have to get yourself into the same mindset. Go into it telling yourself that you'll still be just friends when it's over. Zane came into view as he carried his pail of milk to the strainer. Well, I say you go for it. Lay one on her like you mean it. If you're too chicken to tell her how you feel, let that kiss do the talking for you. He would. At 16, Zane possessed more bravado than Chase ever had. If he took this advice, he might end up with nothing. Or worse, Ray could hate him for the rest of her life. After finishing up the early morning chores, they made their way back across the frost-covered lawn to the white farmhouse with clapboard siding where 3 generations of the Spencers had raised their families. The land had been in the family for even longer. A crumbling chimney out in the woods behind the house was the only evidence left of the original cabin that had been built by their great-grandfather. The familiar scent of bacon and eggs greeted them as soon as Wade opened the back door. Chase caught the hint of something sweet and turned back to look at Zane. Pancakes. Zane's smile matched the one Chase felt spreading across his face as he repeated the word. Pancakes. They hurriedly kicked off their work boots and hung their jackets in the mud room. Zane was the first to step up to the large utility sink, but the other 2 crowded in next to him. Saturday mornings on the farm usually included a big breakfast, but pancakes were never a guarantee. Chase waited for Wade to finish drying his hands, while Zane used the end of the shirt he wore. Ma would have a fit when she saw the wet handprints. With all his hurrying, the boy waited so he could follow in behind his brothers, no doubt to hide the evidence. Across the kitchen their sister, Jolene, looked back at them just before entering the dining room with a coffee pot in each hand. Can one of y'all grab the syrup from the stove? Everything else is on the table. I've got it. Chase carefully poured the warm syrup into the small pitcher waiting by the stove and carried it into the dining room where everyone sat waiting. He took the empty chair between his mama and Zane. Without prompting, they held hands and Wade said a prayer. Being the oldest, Wade had taken up the responsibilities of the farm and family since their father passed away 4 years ago, which included blessing the meals. As soon as they said amen, Zane reached for the pancakes, sliding a large stack of them onto his plate. Chase took his share and then passed them on around to his mama. Next came the bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. They would need this big breakfast to fuel all the work to come. He couldn't eat like this every day, not and sit behind a desk. He'd be as big as one of the milk cows if he did. Chase, I hear you and Rachel have plans to go to Six Flags in a couple of weeks. I'm surprised they're open this time of year. His fork stopped halfway between his plate and mouth as he stared at his mama. Ma didn't look up as she smeared blackberry jam across the top of her pancakes. How much did she know, and who told her? He had only just told his brothers minutes ago. Since Jolene had started college a couple of years back, she and Ray didn't talk much. And they had never been close enough for Ray to randomly call her up and share this information to begin with. Belva. At 24 years old, this sister fell in between him and Wade in the family lineup. Even though she was married now, she and Ray still kept in touch. And Belva told Ma everything. I think they have it decorated for Christmas, or something. Ma's whole face lit up. Really? Nobody loved Christmas more than Leora Spencer. Their mama went all out for the holiday. The hope in her eyes was unmistakable. It might be nice to walk through and see it all lit up. I wouldn't mind seeing that myself. And maybe one day he'd take her, but not this trip. Heat moved its way up his neck at the thought of her witnessing him and Ray kissing along with a group of strangers, all doing the same thing. It was bound to be awkward enough without the presence of his mama. Zane snickered from the other side of him. We should all go. I'm sure Ray wouldn't mind. Chase pressed his heel down on top of Zane's sock-covered foot, wishing he still wore boots. When are y'all going? No. He jerked around to look at his mama. Did she know about the planned kiss? She looked innocent enough as she gazed at him over her cup of coffee, but the woman had this thing of leading a conversation in such a way that the guilty ended up incriminating themselves. Telling himself he had nothing to hide, Chase kept steady eye contact. December 10th. We plan to leave Saturday morning and come back Sunday. Ma's shoulders dropped along with her jaw. That's the weekend of Shiloh's Christmas parade. I can't believe you'd miss that. Her brows knitted together. You two should have consulted the calendar before making these plans. Can't you reschedule? No, this mistletoe kissing business only happened on that one day, but he wasn't about to tell her that. Of course, it wouldn't matter which day in December it fell on. The family calendar was booked for the whole month. His mama loved Christmas traditions, and she seemed to add more every year. Ray has already booked the hotel rooms. Don't worry, we'll still be here for everything else you have planned. She huffed. They are not my plans. We have been going to the parade since forever. And it's great advertisement for the farm. Chase didn't think parading through the town square in a truck with the farm's logo on the side of it was going to make much of an impact, but he wouldn't tell her that. He and Wade had worked the past couple of years to find better ways to advertise than the outdated methods that had been employed in the past. But that wasn't Ma's point. The truck will still be in the parade, and I don't think anyone will miss two less people riding in the back of it. Wade could always be counted on to come to his aid. Jolene smiled from across the table. Zane, don't you have a couple of friends to fill in the gap? Oh, I'm sure I can find someone willing. He slapped Chase on the back, before lowering his voice and leaning closer. And I won't have to drag her all the way to Georgia to have the kind of fun Ray has in mind either.
Isn't this the best hummus dip you've ever eaten? It's a new recipe Bloomstein's Deli is trying out. I do hope they decide to keep it on the menu. Rachel looked across the table at her mother. You're right, of course. It is the best hummus I've ever eaten. Thanksgiving at the Anthony house had always been different, but this year won the prize. At least there was turkey. Well, the boneless, skinless breast of a turkey, anyway. Next to it sat a platter with an array of cheese and fruit. And then there was the raw veggie tray along with an avocado dip and the aforementioned hummus dip. All compliments of a Jewish deli on the south side of Charlotte. Her mother had given up cooking years ago. It had been a surprise when Herschel Anthony, at age 43, and his wife Eden, who was 40 at the time, were told they were expecting their first and only child. Most of the time Rachel didn't even think about the fact that her parents were old enough to be her grandparents, but lately it had become more noticeable. For one thing, her father would be retiring at the end of the year. He would still be a consultant for his law firm but would no longer go into the office every day. He and her mother planned to travel more starting in the new year. She would be seeing less of them when it already felt like time with her parents was running thin. Her dad's hair was completely white now. And despite how much anti-wrinkle cream her mother had slathered on over the years, thin lines had feathered out around her eyes and lips. And as they had aged, they had become more health-conscious. Which explained the meal. After smearing softened cream cheese over a wheat cracker, Rachel added a strawberry half and popped the whole thing into her mouth. The food didn't matter. She'd be eating leftovers from a real Thanksgiving meal at the Spencer's farmhouse later tonight. For now, she'd at least make more of an effort to enjoy her parents' company. And the food wasn't that bad. I'm sure Mother told you we plan to spend the last couple of weeks in December up north. You'll have a few days off from your job for Christmas. You should join us. I know Nan would love to see you. New York in wintertime. I don't think so. She had visited her grandmother during Christmas before. Extreme cold and piles of snow everywhere weren't her idea of a good visit. But that wasn't even her first objection. She would bear the deli food and an overly quiet dinner table with her parents on Thanksgiving. And if they were going to be in town, she would spend Christmas Eve with them as usual. But Christmas Day would find her with Chase and his family. She'd arrive early to help Ma Spencer, Belva, and Jolene put the finishing touches on the meal. Unlike this meal, the traditional home-cooked one at the Spencer's table would be a boisterous affair with everybody talking at once. Then when everyone was so stuffed they practically wobbled into the living room, they would exchange gifts. Maybe there'd be games after that, or they may even break out the karaoke machine. She wouldn't miss it for the world. I already have plans to go see Nan this summer. It'll be warmer then. Plus, I'll have more time to visit. If I go for Christmas, I'd spend most of my time off traveling. Father patted her hand. I hate to see you spend the holidays alone. I won't be alone. You know the Spencers will take me in if I get lonely. Besides, with your plans to travel once you retire, I might as well get used to it. A look she could not read passed between her parents. In that instant, she got the feeling they were keeping something from her. She pushed the thought away. The things they considered secret-worthy rarely merited much interest for her when they finally decided to tell it. Once the meal was over and the leftovers put away, Rachel changed from the gray dress pants and blouse to a pair of old blue jeans, a t-shirt, and a garnet hoodie with the USC logo. After putting her long brown hair into a messy ponytail, she pulled it through the loop of a baseball cap that matched her hoodie. Her oldest pair of sneakers completed the ensemble. Her parents were nowhere in sight as she made her way to the back door. Normally, they would go for a walk, but since it was a holiday, they were probably holed up in their private sitting room. She could picture them there, the TV turned low broadcasting the news, mother reading the latest novel by Roni Kendig, and father studying a legal journal while taking down notes. She had no doubts that her parents were happy with their life together, but she couldn't imagine wanting the same type of marriage for herself. Marriage was a dream for the distant future, but when it happened, she wanted a house full of noisy kids and a husband whose life didn't revolve around work. Rachel grabbed the keys to her BMW, a college graduation gift from her parents, and headed out the door. It didn't make sense to dwell on the dream of marriage when she didn't even have a boyfriend. The Spencer family was right where she expected them to be when she pulled up in front of their farmhouse. The 5 siblings, along with Belva's husband, Grayson, and a varied group of cousins and friends were out in the field left of the house playing football. Some showed up every year just for this game. She hurried her steps to get to the playing field, hoping she hadn't missed too much. Chase ran toward her with the football clutched in his hand, the rest of the crowd either in pursuit or running interference. The smile he wore grew when he saw her. He ran past the end of the playing field to get to her and then tackled her to the ground. They rolled across the yard, both of them laughing. As soon as they came to a stop, he lifted the football into the air and hollered, "Touchdown." Rachel laughed and pushed against his chest so she could stand, "You crazy thing." He rolled to a standing position, then tossed the ball up into the air and caught it. "What?" "That's what you're supposed to say when you make a touchdown." "Yeah, but you're not supposed to tackle a bystander, especially one who is usually on your team." "Yeah, well that was the last play of the game, so..." They were engulfed by the other players hollering out their congratulations on his winning touchdown and declaring it a good game. Even the losers seemed happy. Rachel hated missing it, but her favorite part of the day was yet to come. Wade came sauntering up in his orange t-shirt with the Clemson logo, USC's rival team. He wrapped his arm around Chase's head and gave him a noogie. "Good game, little bro, but we'll get you next time." Chase backed up, pulling himself out of the headlock. This was just a precursor of what will happen tomorrow when the Gamecocks take Clemson. The family loved football, but they lived for this particular game every year. It was the only time when the Spencers were bound to be divided against one another, but it was all in good fun. "Not gonna happen. You can stay out here with your delusions, but I'm heading to the supper table before Ma declares Thanksgiving is over." At Wade's declaration, everyone picked up speed as they headed toward the house. Ma Spencer believed in giving Thanksgiving its due. She complained when stores put Christmas items out just after Halloween. Not a single bar of a carol was to be heard in her house before nightfall on that day set aside for giving thanks. But after everyone filled up again on leftovers and the kitchen was set to order for the final time, the ban on all things Christmas would be lifted. The season would kick off with them spending the rest of the evening decorating the entire house. As they stood in line for food, Belva stopped to greet Rachel on her way back to the table with a full plate. "Hey, Rachel. You ready for Black Friday? I looked through the ads this morning. My list is out in the car in my purse." "Good, we'll synchronize our mission after we're through decorating." Belva's husband, Grayson, let out a groan good-naturedly from behind his wife. "Great. No sleep tonight. You'll be here half the night and the alarm will be going off before daylight in the morning." She pursed her lips and looked over her shoulder at her husband. "Hush. You'll be up early anyway to go run off this meal. Her voice lowered. Besides, you'd better get used to sleepless nights for when the baby arrives. Rachel gasped. You're pregnant? You mean Chase didn't tell you? She looked over her shoulder at Chase, waiting for an explanation. He held his hands up. Hey, I just found out, and you just got here. I haven't had a chance to tell it yet. Rachel turned back to Belva and Grayson. Congratulations, y'all. When is the baby due? May 28th. They both chimed in at the same time. Belva grabbed Rachel's arm. We'll talk more about it later. The line in front of them had disappeared. She and Chase made their way to the food and started loading their plates. Is it weird that Belva is only a couple of years older than us and she's already married and having a baby when neither of us is even in a serious relationship? She hadn't expected to feel this way. It hadn't bothered her in the least when the couple married a year ago. Then again, she had still been in college at the time. Chase snickered as he continued loading his plate. What about poor Wade? He's even older than Belva. And it isn't a race, but if it bothers you that bad, just say the word. I'll meet you at the courthouse first thing Monday morning, and we can tie the knot. I could have you. You could be in the same condition as Belva before the end of the year. Red creeped up the side of his face. Good. He deserved to feel embarrassment after making such a suggestion, even if he had been only joking. She smacked his arm with her free hand and he laughed. He was always making jokes about the two of them getting married, but this was the first time he'd mentioned them having kids together. Could you imagine the rumors that would start up if we did that? And I don't think your mama would be too happy if you ran off to the courthouse with me, or anyone else for that matter. Are you kidding me? You're already a part of the family, but she'd love it if you officially became a Spencer. If she thought your parents would have agreed to it, she'd have had the adoption papers drawn up years ago, her and Dad both. His Adam's apple bobbed and his demeanor dimmed at the mention of his father. A lump formed in her own throat. She missed Dean Spencer almost as much as Chase did. All of them had treated her like she belonged from her first visit. She wouldn't give her parents up for the world, but time spent here on this farm with this family had enriched her life beyond anything money could buy. Let's use the orange setting for this one. At Sandy's direction, Rachel hurriedly switched out the blue placemat and napkins for the orange plaid ones they had brought along with them for the photo shoot. They were at Gli Amanti's, an Italian restaurant in downtown Charlotte, staging pictures for ads for their home delivery service they planned to launch in the spring of next year. As they'd worked at the table set up in one corner of the bustling kitchen, the noise around them had progressively gotten louder. It had only been the two of them, the chef and his assistant, when they arrived first thing that morning. But the restaurant had gradually filled up, first with workers and now patrons. Sandy lit the taper candle in the middle of the table. Tugging her purple blouse down in the back, she squatted to snap pictures at surface level. Her black, corkscrew curls were tied back from her face with a matching scarf. Thank God, this is the last one. My knees and back are killing me. Rachel perked up. Yeah, and I'm about to starve. All this food is making me hungry. Sandy chuckled and shook her head. Girl, my thighs have gained a half an inch each just smelling this stuff. Every time they bring another plate over, I'm tempted to take a big bite. Glad it's almost over. They're going to love us back at the office. Yes, they will. All of the plates they had staged had been put into takeout containers and placed in the fridge. Everything would be going back to the office with them. The restaurant was even throwing in enough salad and breadsticks for everyone. Done. Sandy twirled her finger over the plate of food as she looked back at the server who had been assisting them with the food. You can pack this one up now. She pulled the strap over her head and replaced the lens cap before carefully setting the camera in its case. Rachel began gathering up their props. She was ready to get off her feet and feed her hunger. She'd probably dream of pasta tonight. We'll start editing these right after lunch, but this is the only project we have scheduled for the week. You should have no problem taking this weekend off for your big date. Sandy wiggled her brows, her smile contagious. One side of Rachel's lips lifted without her permission. It isn't a date. What's this about a date? Both women whipped around to face Jay. What is he doing here? She wanted to ask, but it wasn't her place. Jay was not over their department, but he was her superior. His department was in charge of turning the photos into ads, but he didn't usually have input in how they were staged. He looked back and forth between them. He hadn't addressed Rachel specifically, and she wasn't about to volunteer information about the upcoming trip to Six Flags. Not that she or Chase had anything to hide. It just wasn't Jay's business. And she didn't want to fuel office gossip about their relationship. Was there something you needed, Jay? Sandy had no problem getting to the point. Well, I thought since you were already here, I'd treat you two to lunch. Thanks, but I'm ready to get out of here. His smile brightened as he looked to Rachel. What about you, Rachel? Can I tempt you into having lunch with me? Just then two of the restaurant employees stepped up, both of them loaded down with bags of food. Do y'all need help carrying these out? That'd be great. I'm parked out back. Sandy took off toward the back door, followed by the food bearers. She grinned at Rachel just before stepping outside. Rachel glanced up at Jay and then back down at the floor. Awkward. Didn't someone tell you? The restaurant is providing lunch for the whole office. Well, I'll head back to the office then. Looks like you'll be needing help getting everything inside. He rubbed his palms together. This should be a good lunch. Glia Manti's food is excellent. Have you ever eaten here before? She shook her head as she slid her arms inside her jacket. He tugged the back of it up for her. She could feel his stare but refused to look up. After grabbing the plastic container of props, they headed to the back. He opened the door and motioned for her to go through first. Real gentlemanly of you, Jay, she thought, but if you really wanted to impress me, you could have offered to carry this tote. They passed the two restaurant employees, who were headed back inside. Rachel made a beeline to Sandy's Jetta and opened the back door. Takeout bags covered the whole back seat. She leaned down to look up front at Sandy. Pop the trunk so I can drop this tote in. Won't fit. You'll have to put it up here in the front seat. Huh, where am I supposed to sit? Sandy smiled over her shoulder at Rachel. Catch a ride with Jay. Jay spoke up from behind her with too much excitement in his voice. I can do that. I can give you a ride. She stood but didn't immediately turn to look at him. Getting in the car with him was the exact opposite of what she had been trying to do, avoid him. He had made his interest obvious from the first time they met. She wasn't interested. It's just a ride, she thought. You'll be in and out of his car in less than 5 minutes. Rachel finally turned and offered him a weak smile. Thanks, that would be great.
Chase set out paper plates, napkins, and utensils on the counter next to the oversized tin of cookies which represented only a portion of all the baking Ray and the women in his family had done over the weekend. Cookie baking marked one of the few activities on Ma's Christmas calendar that didn't involve the whole family. Unless you counted him and his brothers coming through the kitchen trying to sneak a cookie while the girls ran interference. He smiled at the thought as he lifted the lid on the tin and took out a shortbread cookie. He looked around the break room, making sure everything was in order. He'd hear it from Ray if it wasn't. She had texted him earlier saying she and Sandy would be bringing lunch back from their photo shoot. His phone beeped. He slid it out of his pocket and looked at the screen, expecting to see Ray's name pop up. But an unrecognized number displayed instead. A tap on the screen brought up the message. We're headed that way. Loaded with food. Meet us in the parking lot and bring help. Sandy. He didn't remember giving Sandy his number. And why hadn't the message come from Ray? Most likely, her phone had no charge. She was bad about forgetting to plug it in. He headed to the back door, enlisting the help of a couple of interns along the way. Chase squinted when the black Jetta pulled into the lot. It appeared that Sandy was the only occupant. He opened the passenger door and looked at the large plastic tote in the place where Ray should be and then at the driver. Where's Rachel? She's coming. She hitched a ride with Jay. They should be here in a minute. Jay? Sandy's smile was a little too bright. As if she knew that his stomach was now lodged in his throat and maybe found his predicament amusing. He grabbed the tote and bumped the door closed. The interns had already grabbed the bags of food and were halfway back to the building. He stood there under the pretense of waiting for Sandy to get her camera equipment from the trunk, but his eyes were trained toward the road. Where are they and why are they together? Jay's silver Nissan 370Z finally pulled into the parking lot with Rachel inside, but it didn't release the tension in Chase's neck and shoulders. Jay parked the car in his spot closer to the building, jumped out, and hurried around to open the passenger door. But Ray stepped out of the car before he got there. Good girl, he thought. She smiled at Chase as he came closer. Thanks for grabbing my tote for me. Anytime. Jay put his hand on Rachel's back and gave one of his plastic smiles. Let's get inside before all the food is gone. He guided them toward the building. Chase zeroed in on where the man's hand lay and swallowed down a growl as the thought "hands off of my girl" ran through his head. As much as he'd like to deny it, he had always been jealous where it concerned Ray. Maybe it wouldn't be this way if they were in a committed relationship, but as it was, he had garnered no promises that she wouldn't end up with someone else. He might die a little if that person wound up being his boss. Chase reached back to help Rachel step off from the roller coaster aptly named Goliath, a huge coaster with stomach-dropping dips and twists that turned you upside down. He and Rachel had this thing where they would start out on the tamest ride a park had to offer and work their way up to the biggest and baddest. She had definitely done a good job at planning this out because there was no arguing that the Goliath fit well into that last category. Yet, it didn't compare to the up and down thoughts running through his head. Only 15 minutes until the kiss happened, and he still didn't know how to go about it. Did he stick with the friendly kiss Rachel probably had in mind, or give her one that would leave her without a doubt that he wanted to change his status from friend to boyfriend? Even as they headed to where the big event would happen, he still didn't have a clue. Jay wouldn't be having this dilemma. Grr. Is everything all right? What? Yeah. I'm fine. Hopefully his smile was convincing. What about you? Are you nervous about, don't say kiss? His mind scrambled for a replacement. Breaking this record? He studied her face for a reaction. She didn't look nervous. Nah, it won't be any different than when we played Spin the Bottle that time at Iona Puckett's party. Remember that? He nodded. Yeah, he remembered. The party had been in celebration of them making it through 6th grade. The girls had outnumbered the boys. He must have kissed every girl there before Ray spun and it landed on him. Actually, it was between Chase and the girl next to him, but no one protested when he claimed it. He had been half in love with her even then. Funny how he hadn't mulled it over for even a second when he'd pressed his lips against hers then. That one was over in the blink of an eye. Even if he went for the friend-approved version, this one would last at least 10 seconds. They veered toward the table at the entrance of the area cordoned off for this event. After signing their names, one of the workers handed Chase a small sprig of mistletoe and a quarter sheet of paper with the instructions printed on it. What does it say? Rachel leaned against his arm. A hint of her perfume drifted up to him and was gone in the next instant. Familiar, yet still enticing. He took a cleansing breath. They will count back from 10. Our lips come together at 0, and we have to hold the kiss until they count back up to 10. One of us is supposed to hold the mistletoe over our heads as we kiss. He tried to swallow, but the Sahara Desert had taken up residency in his throat. The instructions sounded so technical, like no emotions would be involved. Regardless of the type of kiss the two of them shared, he would feel it. He looked at Ray. She stared at the page in his hand. Her cheeks bloomed in a rosy blush. For the first time since coming up with this idea, she finally showed some signs that this was going to be more than a peck on the lips from a friend. Had she not read about the countdown online? Ray, it isn't too late to change your mind. If you're weirded out about kissing me, we can back out of this. No one is forcing you. She finally looked at him. What? Why would I be weirded out about kissing you? No, we're doing this. It'll be fine. She took him by the hand. Come on, let's find a spot close to the edge. I don't want to get trapped in the middle of the crowd once this is over. They wove in and out through the throng of people until coming to the rope sectioning the area off and then worked their way closer to the stage. They stopped about 15 feet from the front before the MC began speaking. Chase tuned out as soon as he realized the man was only using this time to go over the instructions they had already given out and to pump up the crowd. He didn't need any help with the second part of the objective. His nerve endings were already thrumming along with the beat of the words to the song playing on repeat in his mind. Friendship kiss or boyfriend kiss? Friendship kiss or boyfriend kiss? Friendship kiss or boyfriend kiss? Okay, folks, get those lips ready. We're about to start the countdown. The peppy kid with the mic might as well have shot off a cannon for the jolt his words sent through Chase. He turned to face Rachel. She glanced up at him once before her wide-eyed stare landed on his chest and stayed there. She sucked in a few breaths, shook her hands out at her sides, and bounced from one foot to the other like a prize fighter waiting for the bell to sound. 10. 9. Ray pointed at his hand. The mistletoe. His hand jerked into position, the mistletoe hanging over their heads. He took a step closer and wrapped his other hand around her upper arm. 2. 1. Kiss. Their lips bumped together with a jerk. He tilted his head for a better fit. His lips gently moved against hers and she responded in kind. Sliding his hand around to her back, he pulled her closer. Her hands moved slowly up his chest and then to the sides of his face. The kiss deepened. She tasted sweet, like the funnel cake they had shared earlier. It barely registered that everyone around them was cheering, yet their kiss continued. Still holding the mistletoe, his arm dropped around her, pulling her even closer. Someone bumped into him from behind, bringing him to his senses. He was kissing Ray thoroughly. And she was kissing him back. What did it mean? He gently broke the kiss and pulled his head back enough to look at her, steeling himself in case her response ended up being a slap to the face. For a few glorious seconds, she stood there with her eyes closed, a look of pure bliss coloring her features. Then she slowly blinked a couple of times just before her brow pinched together and confusion clouded her blue eyes. Oh.
What did I just do? Rachel replayed the last several minutes in her head as they made their way to the parking lot. Chase had asked if she was nervous. She hadn't been, but only because she had pictured a quick peck on the lips between friends. It wasn't until she realized they had to hold the kiss that her stomach started quaking. Why didn't I see that on the website before? Okay, so they couldn't just stand with their lips pressed together. That would be awkward. She had planned to move hers against his so it would seem like a real kiss. But she hadn't expected the way his would feel, all warm and soft and pliable. She never would have predicted the thrill that pinged against her nerve endings when he pulled her closer, or how the feel of his heart beating beneath taut chest muscles and the scruff of his 5 o'clock shadow against her palms would excite her. What were your hands doing there anyway? Then she had deepened the kiss. Until today, the sum of her kissing experience had consisted of the innocent pecks delved out while playing spin the bottle at Iona's party, and one incident during college when some guy offered to walk her back to her dorm after a late-night study session. Without invitation, he had pressed his lips against hers, and after shoving him away, she threatened to mace him. He never spoke to her again, and she couldn't even remember his name now. But Chase had kissed her back. What did that mean? It means nothing. He's a guy. What man is going to turn away from something like that? It was as if her mother had taken up residence in her head. Rachel studied Chase's profile as he unlocked her car door. Was he nervous? Was his mind exploding with questions just like hers? Or did it mean nothing and she was the one reading too much into it? He glanced over at her. Where do you want to go for supper? So it hadn't meant anything. Her shoulders relaxed with relief at the mundane question. And maybe with a twinge of disappointment. Gee whiz, you'd think a kiss like that would have had some kind of effect, she thought. Somehow, her voice sounded steady when she asked, how about the spaghetti warehouse? She wasn't even sure if she could handle something as heavy as pasta right now. But she had noticed it on the drive over and it was the only thing she could think of at the moment. Sounds good. He answered. Her thoughts just would not stop. Why are you worried about whether it meant anything to him or not? Just be glad everything is fine. She propped her elbow against the car door and tapped her fingertips against her lips, still tender from that whopper of a kiss. Yeah, it'll be like it never happened.
Just before Chase made it to the barn, the sound of the front door opening had him turning back to see who it was. Jolene slid her arms into her jacket as she hurried across the yard. Hold up, I'm coming to help with the chores. Yeah, right. The only time his sister helped out in the barn was when one of the guys was sick. No doubt finding out what happened between him and Ray was the real reason she was so anxious to join him. He hadn't discussed it with her, but there were no secrets in this family. Chase held the barn door for her to enter. No sooner had they made it inside when she turned suddenly to look at him. "So, tell us what happened. Are you and Ray a couple now?" He looked past Jolene to his two brothers. Even as they worked, Wade and Zane looked keenly back at him, awaiting his answer. He shook his head and went to work. Zane called out from where he sat milking a cow. "You should have laid one on her like I told you to. Gets every time." "I did." The sound of milk hitting pails ceased instantly. Chase pulled his stool closer to the cow in front of him and sat down. He looked up to see Wade standing, looking over the cow's back at him. "What did she do?" "She kissed me back." Jolene came and leaned against the middle stall where Chase Saturday. "Well, that sounds promising. What happened after the kiss ended?" He scowled at his sister and let out a huff. "Nothing. It was like the kiss meant nothing to her. She acted like everything was the same, and I did the same thing. End of story." A snicker sounded from behind him. "He probably didn't do it right. Chase, you need some pointers? How many girls have you kissed, Zane? Let's just say enough to know I'm doing it right." If it wasn't for the chance that the cows would stampede and tear up the barn, he'd chuck his milk pail right at his little brother's head. What if he has a point? No, that kiss had felt too right for him to have been doing it wrong. "Why don't I just tell Ray how you feel about her and see what she says?" He glared up at Jolene. "What? Are we still in grade school? That's not how you adult." "Well, excuse me, Mr. Spencer." Her head bobbed as she spoke. "I figure it worked back then, it should work now. Besides, since you can't seem to get the nerve up to ask her out, I'm guessing you don't know how to adult yet." She stuck her tongue out at him just before pivoting on her heel and heading toward the exit. "Hey, I thought you came out here to help with the chores." The sound of her sliding out of the barn door was the only reply he got. For a few moments, all remained quiet except for the sound of milking and the cows munching on hay. Wade stopped at his stall on his way to the milk strainer. "Maybe you should have let Jolene talk to her." "I don't know, maybe women still do that sort of thing." Chase shook his head. "Don't you think she's probably already talked to Ray about it? If she hasn't, Belva surely has. They talk all the time. My guess is Ray's not interested." "Then how do you explain the kiss?" "I don't know, she was caught up in the moment." "How do you explain how she acted when it was over?" "I'm telling you, that kiss meant nothing to Ray. I'm better off leaving it at friends before I wind up with nothing."
45 minutes. That's how long into their workday it took for Sandy to ask Rachel about her weekend. About the kiss. "So are you and Chase engaged now or what?" Rachel glanced over her shoulder at her coworker setting up a photo shoot across the room. Sandy didn't have to look her way for Rachel to know that she was joking. "Nothing has changed, just like I told you. The kiss was nothing more than two friends helping to break a world record. That's all." She stared at her computer screen, hoping that came off as nonchalant. Who are you trying to fool?" Rachel whipped around to find Sandy standing there with a fist on her hip, her brows lowered with a know-it-all look in her eyes. Was she bluffing? She didn't reply just in case. "He kissed you for real?" "Yes, he did." Sandy accentuated each word with a jab of her finger. "And you kissed him back. You can't deny it this time." Her face burned red. She could feel it. But that wasn't definitive proof that Sandy was right. She looked back to her computer, choosing to ignore the accusation, or at least pretend to. "You don't know, do you?" Her stomach dropped. She looked over her shoulder at her coworker, wishing she didn't have to ask. But if she didn't give in to the urge, it would drive her bonkers. "No what?" Sandy held up one finger in a signal to wait. And the waiting just might kill her. Rachel swiveled her chair around and watched the woman walk over to her computer and tap away on her keyboard. She then motioned for her to come over, and Rachel shuffled her feet until her chair rolled next to Sandy's. With a click of the mouse, a news segment video started playing. An overly enthusiastic female voice spoke as the camera spanned the crowd of kissing couples. 839 couples participated at 7 different Six Flag locations across the country to break the world record of most couples kissing under the mistletoe. The woman gave a fake laugh that barely registered with Rachel as she stared in horror at the screen as the camera lens zoomed in. Looks like some of them have truly gotten into the spirit of the moment. There she and Chase stood near the edge of the crowd, locked in a heated embrace, still going at it while everyone around them cheered and carried on over the fact that they had gotten to be a part of the event. Rachel closed her eyes and placed her hands over her heated face. Who else has seen this? My parents? Chase? What difference did it make if Chase saw it? He had been there when she'd made a fool of herself. Had even taken part in it. Her hand slowly slid down her face, her fingers spreading so she could peek at Sandy. Do you know if that broadcasted locally? A search of the internet brought up 3 of the local stations that had aired information about the record-breaking event. She watched with bated breath as one of the news segments played. This one was from a different angle and it panned the crowd without zooming in on her and Chase like the first one did. The next 2 were the same. Some of her tension released with a sigh. Hopefully no one around here saw us? Sandy turned to look at her. Who watches the local news anymore? I'm guessing if no one said anything to you before now, they either didn't see it, or they didn't recognize you. Who all knew you were doing this? I only told you and Chase's sister, Belva, but I'm pretty sure the rest of his family knows. She bit her thumbnail and stared at the screen. If her parents saw it, they would have said something. They probably wouldn't care for their daughter making a spectacle of herself on television, but what would they think about knowing she had kissed Chase? What I want to know is, how can you kiss the man like that and then still try to tell me you're just friends? One of Sandy's eyebrows went up. Rachel sat back in her chair and folded her arms across her chest. I don't know. We had to hold the kiss for 10 seconds and I guess I got carried away. After it was over we both tried to act like it was nothing, but what if I've ruined everything? We are supposed to be friends and now it just feels awkward. What if it never goes back to the way it was? Is that what you want? I mean, it looks to me like Chase was really into that kiss. Maybe he wants to be more than friends. Rachel didn't even try to hold back her eye roll. He's a man. Of course he wasn't going to turn down a makeout session. If he wanted to be more than friends, wouldn't he have done something to let me know how he felt? Like at least hold my hand or something? I'm telling you, he acted like it was nothing. Really? All men? So the next time I run into Chase in the hallway, you're saying if I grabbed him up in a kiss, he'd give me the same treatment you received? Sandy shook her head. I don't think so. Rachel huffed. You're right, okay. But the only alternative is he just got caught up in the moment, then decided afterward that he never wanted to do it again. Sandy threw her hands out. And again I ask, is that what you want? I don't know what I want, okay? She shoved off with her feet and rolled back over to her desk. Before that kiss, she didn't have to think about where their relationship was headed. If only she could undo this mess she had made.
After shutting down his computer for the day, Chase straightened his desk like he did at the end of every workday. He wanted minimal distractions when work resumed in the morning. Satisfied that everything was in its place, he slid his chair beneath the desk and shouldered his messenger bag. Jay stepped through the door at that very moment. It was like he'd been waiting to catch Chase leaving early. He leaned against the door casing with his hands in his pockets and his legs crossed at the ankles. Leaving early? I came in early so I could get everything done. Was there something else you needed me to do? He had to ask, but he mentally begged him to say no. Got a hot date on a Wednesday afternoon? Jay smiled and shook his head. Man, I can't compete with that action. Weird. That statement would be strange coming from a friend, but Jay saying it was even more bizarre. Actually, my family is meeting in McAdenville to see the lights. A tiny town outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, McAdenville's only claim to fame was its spectacular Christmas lights display. One of the Spencer family rituals was to meet in town before the lights came on to have supper together. If you waited until dark, you'd end up in a long line of cars waiting to get in. Jay studied him like a bug under a magnifying glass. I heard Rachel say she was going too. Chase nodded even as he tried to figure out the point of this whole conversation. Was Jay looking to be invited? If so, it would be a long wait. Rachel spends a lot of time with my family. I told you, we've known each other for a long time. So she's like a sister to you? Sort of. Not really, he thought. Jay grinned. Then you won't mind if I ask her out on a date? Be my guest. Jay had already tried to get her to go to lunch with him on more than one occasion and Ray had shot him down. The man didn't stand a snowball's chance in July, but that didn't keep the sick feeling from rolling through Chase's stomach at the thought of the two of them together. With a nod, Jay sauntered out into the hallway. Chase exhaled a pent-up breath and headed to Rachel's office. She was still working when he stuck his head through the door. Are you ready? She looked up at him with wide eyes and then back at her monitor. I lost track of time. Give me a sec. After saving her work and shutting down her computer, she jumped up and grabbed her coat. Smiling at the mess she left behind on her desk, he helped her into her coat and they headed out.
Y'all don't forget, I'm going to need Santa pictures from all of you before Christmas is done. Ma Spencer's pointed finger made its way around the table to all of her kids, stopping at Rachel. Wade and I went to the mall Saturday and had ours done, but I still need one from the rest of you to go in this year's scrapbook. Ma Spencer had made a scrapbook for every year since her wedding day. Rachel's pictures had ended up in the last 15 of them. Countless photos of her and Chase together, and not once had she ever considered having a romantic relationship with him. Until now. Not until after that mind-blowing kiss. Were the same thoughts running through his head too? Chase leaned closer. His breath on her neck shot a jolt of awareness through her. There will be a Santa Claus at the office party. We can have one made then. Or we can go to the mall, as usual. It's your call. Really? Won't there only be adults at the party? She lowered her voice. I thought the only grown-ups who had their pictures taken with Santa were in your family. She was kidding, of course. Every year when they went for their picture, there were plenty of adults doing the same thing. He shrugged one shoulder. Well, we can invite our families. I guess there could be kids there too. One side of her lips went up. Yeah, right. They're having it during the day on a Thursday. Won't kids be in school at that time? Ray, it's the Thursday before Christmas. Kids will be off for the holidays then. She smacked her palm against her forehead. Duh. It's hard to keep up since I'm no longer in school and have no kids of my own. Studying the face of the man sitting beside her, she wondered what their child would look like. That is, if they ever had one. Brown hair was a given, but would it be light with natural blonde highlights like hers, or would it lean toward the richer shade of Chase's? His hazel eyes, or blue like hers? Would the child have his dad's crooked smile and dimples? I hope so, she thought. What? Chase ran his hand over his mouth. Do I have food on my face? She shook her head and looked away. What was wrong with her? Other than some vague inclinations about the distant future, she'd not given much thought about having kids before, let alone what they would look like. Or that Chase might be the daddy. Is it time to get started yet? Zane jumped up from across the table and slipped his arms into his coat. Well, I'm ready. We're going to Krispy Kreme after this, right? Belva's jaw dropped. You just ate and you're already thinking about food again? There is always room for a donut. Besides, we'll have worked up an appetite by then. Everyone stood and began donning coats, hats, and gloves except for Ma Spencer, Wade, and Jolene. They would be viewing McAdenville's lights from the warmth of Wade's truck while the rest of them walked along the sidewalk. The group made their way through town, past the yarn mill situated in the heart of the town, and headed down the hill toward the pond. The whole area was bathed in red, white, and green lights. The cold, crisp air dipped drastically as they neared the pond. They stopped to look out over the water. Lit Christmas trees circled the pond. Their reflection in the water below doubled the effect of the lights. The spray of water from the pump in the center periodically changed color, adding another point of interest. The air blowing across the water had an icy feel to it. Rachel shivered and drew her coat up closer to her face. She felt Chase's arms circle around her and without thinking, she turned and buried her face into his neck. Something she had done countless times before suddenly felt intimate. Like the proverbial devil on one shoulder and angel on the other, an argument started up in her mind. You should step away. What could it hurt to stay right here for a few moments? He might get the impression you want to be more than just friends. Well, maybe I do want to be more than friends. She inhaled the scent of his skin and her body melted closer to his on the exhale. Chase tightened his hold and pressed his face into the side of her head. Everything felt different to her since their kiss. Did he feel it too? I had an interesting conversation with Jay today. She pulled back and looked up at him. The topic of his boss contrasted annoyingly with the mood of their embrace. He said he wanted to ask you out. It was like he was asking my permission or something. She took a step back. And what did you say? He looked back over the pond before looking back at her. One side of his lips raised in a half smile. I told him to go for it. Her ire rose up in an instant. She whipped around and stomped up the hill to join the rest of their group who had gone on without them. How dare he encourage Jay? He knows I've been avoiding this very thing. Hurt tried to push its way past the anger. No question about it, if Chase could so easily tell another man to go for it, he definitely wasn't interested in changing the status of their relationship. Chase caught up to her and tugged on her sleeve. What? I thought you'd get a laugh out of it. And what could be so funny about Jay asking me out? Come on, Ray. He'll ask you out and you'll say no. You'll be doing him a favor. Maybe then he'll leave you alone and turn his attention to some other poor girl. Or maybe I'll say yes. What do you think about that? His face blanked as he stared at her. She spun on her heel and hurried to walk beside Belva.
She was out on a date. With Jay. And it was all his fault. When Chase mentioned that his boss wanted to ask her out, Rachel's reaction hadn't been one he expected. There hadn't really been a plan when he'd started the conversation. She had nuzzled her face into his neck, and the urge to kiss her again had become almost unbearable. For him to bring Jay up in that moment was proof that he had lost some of his brain cells under that mistletoe this past weekend. And this date was causing her to miss Christmas movie marathon night at his house. Ray loved staying up all night with his family watching Christmas movies, and she was missing it for that guy. What a joke. He grabbed his thermal cup and headed to the kitchen right in the middle of It's a Wonderful Life. He had seen it countless times, but for the life of him, he had no idea which scene was playing once he walked away. After refilling his cup with ice, he added more water. The cold seeping through his socks from the linoleum floor barely registered as he stood staring at his own reflection in the dark window above the sink. According to the clock on the stove, it was 5 minutes after 10. Had the date ended yet? More importantly, had Rachel allowed Jay to give her a goodnight kiss? His mind conjured up an image of the two of them locked in the same type of kiss he had shared with her at Six Flags. Pure torture. Ma came shuffling into the kitchen. She shivered and pulled her robe closed in the front, hiding her "I belong in Graceland" nightshirt. Ray had given it to her years ago and it was Ma's favorite. He watched as she took out a pot and filled it with milk before setting it on the stove. How about some hot chocolate? Doesn't that sound good right about now? Chase kissed her cheek before reaching into one of the cabinets and pulling out the cocoa for her. Sounds like a plan. So why are you standing here in this drafty old kitchen instead of in there next to the fire with your family? You're missing out on the best part of the movie. He could point out that she was too, but avoiding her question wouldn't help. He held up his cup. I just came to get some water. Look to me like you were moping. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain female friend who is out on a date with someone besides you, would it? Ma, you know Ray and I are just friends. I was friends with your daddy too. Until the day he passed on. And you know what, when we meet at the pearly gates, we'll still be friends. His shoulders slumped. You know what I mean. But Ray and I have never dated. We've never even talked about it. How can I be upset that she's out with someone else? She poked him in the shoulder with her fingertip. Because you're in love with the girl. Have been for a long time. And if you say otherwise, you're lying. Ma turned the knob on the stove to its lowest setting and then leaned against the counter next to him. Son, it's past time. You need to tell her how you feel. If she doesn't feel the same way, then so be it. Rachel isn't going to abandon the friendship you've built over a lifetime. If she was to deny you a deeper relationship, it might turn awkward for a little while, but then things will eventually go back to normal. At least it'll all be out in the open then. Just listening to his mama talk about it made him feel queasy. I have to disagree with you on the part about it going back to normal. If we don't end up together, that means we'll eventually end up with someone else. How do you think it would go over with our future spouses if Ray and I remain as close as we are now? Is your friendship with Rachel the same as it was, say 10 years ago? Chase laughed and shook his head. You mean, back when girls had cooties? No, Ma. We're closer now than we've ever been. What was normal then is different than today's normal, which will be different than 10 years from now, but that doesn't mean you won't still be friends. Things change and that isn't always a bad thing. The thought that 10 years from now, he and Ray may not be as close depressed him. Was it really worth the risk?
She was missing Christmas movie marathon for this? When she had agreed to go out with Jay, Rachel made it perfectly clear that they would only be going out as friends. But here they sat at a candlelit table for two in one of the most upscale restaurants in Charlotte, while he went on about his family's money and his possessions, things that would impress some women, but not her. And the way he looked at her through half-closed eyes, touching her hand every chance he got. It gave her a pounding headache, and she just wanted it all to go away. What she really wanted to do was go home, get into her most comfortable PJs, and crawl so deep into the covers that she could forget this day even happened. No, her deepest wish was to have headed to the Spencers for movie night instead of coming here. She blamed Chase for this date that wasn't supposed to be a date. If only he hadn't encouraged Jay to ask her out. Well, to be honest, that wasn't it either. The fact that Chase hadn't asked her out himself upset Rachel more than anything. Jay placed his hand over hers resting on the table. It's still early, I thought we might head to the theater next. Rachel slid her hand from beneath his. Jay, I have to be perfectly honest with you. When you asked me to go to dinner with you, I thought it might be nice to hang out as friends. Liar. You did it to make Chase jealous. She pushed through the guilty thought. This thing between her and Jay needed to end, regardless of her reasons for being here tonight. I thought I made it perfectly clear that I'm not looking for a relationship. He sat back in his chair. This is just dinner, and friends go see movies together, don't they? She twirled her finger in a circle and looked around them to make her point. This is not the type of place you take a friend. Look at me. I'm still dressed in the clothes I wore to work. The dark dress pants and navy sweater were dressy enough for her job, but not something you would wear to a place like the Fig Tree. Tonight's meal for just the two of them would cost every bit of $150. He held his hands up. I admit, I was hoping to impress you. I have admired you for a while now. Can you blame me for trying to change your mind about dating me? A little of her tension deflated. Jay, you are a great guy, and the meal was nice. It really was, but her mind tried to come up with the right words. How do you tell someone you're not interested without making that person feel bad? He spoke next, saving her from having to finish that sentence. You just don't feel the same attraction toward me that I feel for you. He smiled and nodded his head. Believe me, I get it. No hard feelings, and no awkwardness at work on Monday? Rachel smiled for what felt like the first time all day. Sounds good to me. After the meal ended, Jay drove her back to the office where she had left her car. They parted on fairly good terms. Come Monday she hoped it would be as he said and there wouldn't be any awkwardness between them. As she drove back to South Carolina in the dark, she went over everything that had been said between them. Why had it been so much easier to be honest with Jay than it was to tell Chase how she felt? That she wanted more? The answer wasn't all that hard to come by. She stood to lose a lifelong friendship if Chase didn't feel the same way about her. Was it worth the risk? It was probably a good thing she hadn't stayed up all night with the Spencers watching movies since Rachel had to take her parents to the airport this morning. Then again, for all the tossing and turning she'd done last night, it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference. She massaged her neck as she stared into her closet, trying to figure out what to wear. She'd be headed to Belva's later so they could work on their gingerbread house for the family's yearly contest. Each year, Ma Spencer would judge the houses, guys against the girls. This year she, Belva, and Jolene were going to try to make a replica of the farmhouse. Rachel pulled her favorite blue jeans down and slipped them on. The material had been worn until they were soft enough to meld to her hips and legs. A pale blue cashmere sweater added to the desired comfort she needed for the day. A pair of sneakers and a messy ponytail completed the look. She didn't have the energy for anything more. With still another hour before they had to leave for the airport, Rachel went to the kitchen in pursuit of breakfast. She stopped short at the sight of her parents sitting at the table. Her mom jumped up from her seat. Join us for breakfast, dear. Have a seat while I pour you some coffee. The fact that her mother had offered to pour her coffee put Rachel on immediate alert. Ever since she and Dad went on their health kick, her mom had touted the evils of coffee. Though her dad still drank it, Mom now drank unsweetened tea instead. Her father pulled the seat out next to him and then pushed the bagels and cream cheese closer to the plate that sat waiting for Rachel. She averted her eyes from the plate of thinly sliced smoked salmon in the center of the table. The stuff looked raw to her and she'd never been able to bring herself to try it. She smeared the creamy spread over a bagel and took a bite of the chewy bread as her mom set the cup of coffee and vanilla-flavored creamer in front of her. Dad spoke as soon as his wife returned to her seat. Your mother and I were hoping to have a chance to speak with you before we left for New York. He cleared his throat. You know I'm retiring this month. We've decided, well, your grandmother is getting up in age. There's no telling how many more years we have with her. Here it comes. They're about to pour on the guilt to spend Christmas with them in New York. Not happening. He cleared his throat again and looked at her mom before refocusing on Rachel. While we're in New York, we plan to look for a place to live. She leaned forward and dropped the rest of her bagel on her plate. You mean like a vacation home? No. We'll be moving there, hopefully after the first of the year. Way to drop a bombshell. How long had they been planning this? Knowing her parents, it had been a while. And they're just now finding time to tell me, less than an hour before time for them to leave? Her mother touched her on the arm. Rachel, dear, we were hoping that you would move with us. There are plenty of opportunities to be had for someone in your position. And we thought, she glanced at her husband before continuing. We thought, at your age you will be wanting to settle down and have a family of your own soon. You already know everyone here in Shiloh. If there was someone here for you, well, don't you think you would have found them by now? Rachel took a deep breath. This can't be happening. Having older parents had brought out some old-fashioned ideas when it came to their care of her, but even in their time. She couldn't even finish the thought. This had to be about something else. They couldn't possibly expect. Well, we just thought there would be more of an opportunity to find someone you can spend the rest of your life with in a big place like New York. As she looked back and forth between her parents, Rachel silently counted to 10. 10 isn't enough. Better keep counting, girl. Her mom made a noise as if she were about to start speaking again. She held her finger up. Just give me a minute, please. Mom nodded. Of course, dear. I know this is a lot to take in. Rachel glanced at the clock on the microwave. They had less than 15 minutes before they would need to leave. I know the two of you are from there, so I guess you wanting to return isn't that much of a surprise. She suddenly wondered why it hadn't happened before now. But I was raised here. This is my home. I don't mind visiting, but this is the only place I want to live. She wouldn't even address the part about her finding a husband, in New York or anywhere else for that matter. Because of what happened with Chase, she thought about it more now than ever, but it would have to happen naturally. And if it doesn't? Her father tapped his fingers against the table. Just think about it, Rachel. You don't have to give us an answer right now.
As he finished making the corral for their gingerbread barn, Chase glanced over to see what Wade was working on. He had a chocolate chip trapped within a pair of tweezers and was carving it with a paring knife. Ma's going to kill you when she sees what you're using her tweezers for. And I hope you cleaned them. What are you making, anyway? They're Jolene's. I cleaned them with alcohol, soap, and water. And I doubt anyone would want to eat a cow patty even if it is made of chocolate. Zane snickered. Chase added the last pretzel stick, finishing the corral, and moved to the other side of the kitchen table to check his little brother's progress. Zane was supposed to be adding Christmas lights made of colored sprinkles to the edge of the barn's roof. Except his hand hovered over the center instead. What are you doing? Winning. Zane stepped back to reveal Elvis spelled out across the snow-covered roof. Nice. That ought to get Ma's attention if nothing else does. Nobody loved Elvis Presley more than their mother. They stood back and took one final inspection of their creation. This year's entry was a replica of their barn. Well, almost. The red they had added to the gingerbread recipe almost matched their barn, and they had duplicated the corral and 3 milk cows as close as possible. But it didn't snow that often in South Carolina, and surprisingly they had never bothered to string Christmas lights on the barn before. Wade carried the tweezers to the sink to wash off the chocolate residue. "What time is it?" Chase glanced at the clock as he rolled the bag of pretzels closed. "A few minutes, till 5. The girls will be here soon. Grayson better get his butt back in here if he doesn't want his wife asking questions." Their brother-in-law had helped with the initial construction and then headed out to the barn to work on one of Belva's Christmas presents. He was refinishing the old cradle that had been used with all 5 of the Spencer kids. It was extra special to the family because their father had made it. It would be a bittersweet moment for all of them when it was revealed on Christmas Day. Chase headed upstairs to change clothes. Questions about how Ray's date had gone invaded his mind for the umpteenth time in the last 2 days. He didn't know what he'd do if she came in with a beaming smile declaring that she and Jay were now a couple. Just as he finished dressing, he heard a commotion downstairs. He took the stairs 2 at a time, stopping short at the sight of his older sister wearing a maternity top as she and Jolene carefully carried in their gingerbread house. When he'd last seen Belva a couple of days ago, she had looked a little chubby in her regular clothes, though he had sense enough not to mention it to her. But today she looked pregnant. It finally sunk in that his sister was going to have a baby. Belva was only 2 years older than him. She had been his age when she married Grayson. He shook away the runaway train of thought and moved in to take Belva's side of the load. "Here, let me help you with that. Don't you dare drop it. It'll be an automatic forfeit if you do." She relinquished her side of the project and rubbed her stomach, drawing his attention back to her condition. "You should have asked for help getting this out of the car. You shouldn't be lifting anything right now." Her fingertips brushed his hair as she swatted at the side of his head. "Being pregnant doesn't mean I'm helpless. Do you really think I'd do anything to hurt the baby? Hey now, if I drop this it's going to be your fault." He and Jolene carefully set the house next to the barn on the table. He grabbed the corner of the cardboard the barn sat on and turned it until it matched the exact angle in relation to their gingerbread farmhouse, so they replicated the real ones. It was almost as if this had been planned. "Nice touch." Belva pointed at the word Elvis dotting the barn's roof. "But will it trump this?" Chase's gaze dropped down to where she pointed to the sign in front of the gingerbread farmhouse. It read, "Welcome to Mama's." Totally not fair. How am I supposed to compete with that? She leaned into his arm and spoke in a loud whisper. "Marry Rachel and have a couple of your own." His face burned as he looked over his shoulder to make sure Ray hadn't heard. She was nowhere to be seen. "Where is she, anyway? I heard a car pull up a minute ago." "It's probably her." Belva tugged on his arm. "Go easy on her, lover boy. She's had a rough morning." "What happened?" His thoughts raced. It seemed like an eternity before his sister responded. "I'll let her tell you. If Jay did anything to hurt her, I'll." He'd never hit anyone before, but he believed he'd have the upper hand if it came to that. Anything for Ray. Blue. The word that came to Chase's mind when Rachel stepped through the door was blue. She wore her favorite blue jeans, they were his favorite too. And that sweater he bought her because it matched the blue color of her eyes. Every time she wore it, he would find a reason for his hand to brush her sleeve. The softness of the material weirdly reminded him of her. And today, the color matched her mood. Normally he would take her in his arms for a hug when she came in looking like this, but with everything turned sideways, the kiss, the fact that she had just gone out with someone else, and Chase didn't know where she stood with Jay, all had their normal feeling off. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Come on. You look like you need a talk." She nodded and allowed him to lead her into the office just off from the entrance. More than anywhere else in the house, this room reminded him of his dad. A large desk took up a good portion of the room, but there was a small sitting area to one side where his mother used to sit and sew while her husband did the paperwork. After his death, everyone avoided coming in here, so there was less of a chance that their conversation would be interrupted. He closed the door behind them and led her to the love seat by the front window. "I can tell something's wrong." "What's going on?" "My parents are moving to New York." "Not what I expected." Honestly, he had hoped she would put him out of his misery and talk about her date with Jay first. But this was worse than anything she could say about her relationship with his boss. Question zoomed through his mind. He tried to grasp the one that concerned her the most, but the ones that pushed their way to the front were all about how this would affect him. Before he could organize his thoughts, Ray started spilling out everything that was said between her and her parents that morning. When she got to the part about their hopes that she would follow them there with the purpose of finding a husband, a heart attack seemed inevitable. She didn't need to move to New York to find someone. He thought, I'm right here. So are you going? It felt like someone else had said those words. No way would he let her leave. Not without him telling her how he felt and begging her to stay. No, I'm not moving to New York. Are you crazy? My home is here. I have no desire to live anywhere else. Thank you, God. His whole body felt limp with relief. I'm guessing they'll be selling their house here. Ray grabbed his arm. I hadn't even thought about that. Where am I going to live? Don't worry, we'll find somewhere for you when the time comes. He wanted to say yeah, with me. The urgency to move forward in their relationship pulsed through him. But they still hadn't talked about Jay. He would need to slay that dragon before he could move on. A knock sounded on the office door, followed by Zane almost cautiously peeking in. Ma sent me to get you. She said to tell you Wade is back with the pizzas, and after that comes the judging, and then we'll play cards for the rest of the night, as if you didn't know that part. But you know Ma. She probably thought you were in here making out or something equally fun and decided to break it up. Chase had the urge to chuck something at him, but Zane had ducked back out as soon as the last word flew out of his mouth. He said stuff like this all the time, embarrassing to Chase because that's exactly what he would have liked to be caught doing, but Ray always laughed at his little brother's antics. Except she wasn't laughing this time. Fighting a smile, she looked away. A rosy hue he hadn't seen too often from her bloomed up her slender neck and the side of her face. He had the urge to kiss her right where her jaw met her neck. As if sensing his thoughts, she jumped up from the love seat, took a couple of steps, and then reached her hand back to him. Come on. The sooner we eat pizza, the sooner we women get to rub it in your face that we won. He took her hand and followed, but what he really wanted to do was pull her back to him and kiss her senseless.
Tell us how your date went, sweetie. Ma Spencer's eyes gleamed as she awaited Rachel's reply. Even though she'd made it clear to Jay before they went out that it wasn't a date, the Spencers thought that it was, and she had never corrected anyone. All because she had been mad at Chase for encouraging the man. In hindsight, her reasons showed serious immaturity on her part. Rachel shrugged one shoulder and then discarded a card. It went all right. He took me to this restaurant called the Fig Tree. Sounds fancy. This came from Wade. He was looking back and forth between her and Chase with a smirk on his face. She never would have thought her dating would hold such interest. It was nice and the food tasted great. Where did you go after that? This time it was Zane looking over the top of his cards with rapt attention focused on her. She glanced around the table. Chase sat beside her with his lips pressed together as he stared at his cards. Belva and Grayson were sharing a whispered conversation. Looking amused, Jolene smiled and shrugged her shoulders. But Chase's two brothers were awaiting her answer as if life on this planet depended on it. We didn't go anywhere after that. He took me back to my car, and I was tired, so I went home. Not to mention the fact that she'd been made at Chase. Are you going to go out with him again? Chase didn't look at her as he waited for her to answer. He rearranged the cards in his hand instead. No, we decided it was best to just remain friends. More like work associates, but she didn't say it. A whoosh of air left Chase's lips. His whole body relaxed as if he had been holding his breath since the conversation first started. Was he relieved that she wouldn't mess things up with him at work by dating and then breaking up with his boss? Or did he not like the idea because of a little jealousy? She pursed her lips. If he was jealous, Chase never would have encouraged Jay to ask her out. What could she do to get him to notice her as more than a friend? Her gaze landed on the sprig of mistletoe hanging in the doorway between the dining room and kitchen. Would a replay of their first kiss do the trick? She slumped back in her chair. No, that hadn't worked the first time. But you didn't know how you really felt then, she thought. Ma Spencer patted her hand. Rachel, honey, it's your turn. Rachel picked up a card and discarded another. Zane and Wade slapped their hands down and hollered rummy, almost at the same time. She needed to pay attention to the game. But even with this thought, she found herself staring up at the mistletoe. Chase nudged her arm and leaned in to whisper in her ear. Thinking about 6 Flags? She held her cards up to hide her mouth in case one of his brothers could read lips and whispered back at him. How'd you know? He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled Rachel closer with his mouth against her ear. A chill shot down her arm. You've been staring at that mistletoe since we sat down at the table. Anytime you want a reenactment, just let me know. Heat flooded her whole body, which in turn cooled her skin, causing her to shiver. Was he serious? Chase had said stuff like this before, but she'd always taken it as a joke. Now it confused her. Ma, Ray is cheating. She's showing Chase her cards and he's looking. I think you should make them fix all of us some more hot chocolate. Rachel jerked away from Chase. She didn't have to see her face to know it was blazing, and it had nothing to do with Zane accusing her of cheating. From the smiles and winks coming from those around the table, she wondered if they had heard what Chase said. Then again, what did it matter? They had heard him say stuff like that before too. She took a deep breath, then stuck her tongue out at Zane in a brave attempt to deflect the way she felt. You're only trying to get me in trouble because y'all lost at the gingerbread contest. Ma Spencer had said the gingerbread farmhouse won because it had slightly more detail. But her eyes had teared up at the word mama. Their house could have been made of cardboard and it still would have won. Zane folded his arms across his chest. I still say y'all cheated. Ray, I think you're a bad influence. First you conspire with my sisters and now Chase. Don't be a sore loser, Zane. As soon as I play this hand, I'll go fix us some chocolate. There was a smile on Ma Spencer's face as she made a couple of plays and then laid down her last card. I'm out. So, what about it? She had been counting her points, but Chase's whisper completely wiped the figure from her head. She turned to find him smiling at her. Why did she suddenly feel 3 steps behind everyone else? What about what? He looked up and nodded his head towards something beyond her. The reenactment. There's some mistletoe hanging right there. In front of your family? Why not? Now she knew he was bluffing. 2 can play at that game. She leaned forward. Okay. In a blink, his lips were on hers, his hand cradling the back of her head. A whispered thought sounded in the back of her mind, telling her that everyone was watching, but she couldn't pull away. She couldn't stop the kiss. Zane shouted above the din of noise coming from his family members. Whoa. I didn't see that coming. Neither had she.
As soon as everyone started whooping and hollering, Chase knew it had been a mistake to kiss her in front of his family. The fact that she had been extra quiet, sending questioning looks his way during the rest of the evening solidified that sinking notion. But the conversation that started as soon as Rachel walked out the door to head home left no doubts as to the foolishness of that one blissful moment when his lips had connected with hers. Looks like you finally told that girl how you really feel about her. Ma smiled at him from where she leaned against the door leading from the living room to the dining room. He glanced around to find all eyes on him, smirky grins on their faces, before returning to look at her. I didn't. What do you mean, you didn't? Belva glared at him from where she now sat on the couch. You mean to tell me you just kissed the girl right in front of everybody without letting her know in private that you want to be her boyfriend? Another glance around the room showed different levels of annoyance had replaced the grins on his family's faces. Except his mother looked disappointed, and that was worse. You idiot, he thought. Why'd you go and do a thing like that? He had been flirting. No doubt about that. Once he found out there was nothing between her and Jay, he'd had every intention of moving forward, but he hadn't meant to kiss her. It was just, when he had teased Ray about kissing her in front of his family, and she had leaned forward and tilted those lips up to him, he couldn't resist. A teasing peck on the lips may have been forgivable, but that wasn't how it happened. Son, you shouldn't play with her emotions like that. Rachel deserves better. Ma walked back toward the kitchen after that. She was right. He needed to fix this. But how? Sunday rolled out the next morning at breakneck speed. His whole family was involved in the Christmas cantata at church. 2 played instruments, Wade, the guitar, and Grayson, the cello. Everyone else sang. Except for Ma. Her hands were filled with organizing the food. And Ray helped her. Other than sending what he hoped were apologetic looks across the church at Rachel, he hadn't had a chance to speak to her. By the time he got to the overcrowded fellowship hall, she'd found someone else to eat with. And he hadn't even caught a glimpse of her during cleanup. The sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach told him she was avoiding him. Great. He held 2 full garbage bags out from his suit pants as he followed Wade outside. Have you seen Ray? Wade tossed his 2 bags into the back of the farm truck and turned to look at him. She left early with Belva and Grayson. I think they had plans to see a movie tonight. She didn't say anything to you about it? He shook his head and tossed his bags of trash into the bed of the truck. Not only had she not said anything about it, but she hadn't invited him either. Neither did Belva. His sister had been pretty mad at him the night before. Do you think she's mad at me for kissing her? Wade scratched the side of his face. She didn't act mad last night. What about today? Has she said anything about it? I haven't had a chance to speak to her. Oh. The way he stretched the word out didn't help. Should I call and apologize, or should I leave it alone and hope I'm overthinking it? Wade raised his brows, his hand splayed over his chest. You're asking me for relationship advice? As far as Chase knew, his brother had never been in a serious relationship. But who else could he turn to? Should I be asking Zane? Wade took a deep breath and looked out across the field next to the church. Chase could almost see the weight of responsibility settle over him. Since their dad died, a lot had been placed on the oldest son's shoulders, and here he was adding to it. He finally looked at Chase. I think you need to play this one by ear. Leave her alone for today, but pay attention when you see her on Monday. You'll know if she's mad or not. If she is, apologize. Otherwise, if you tell her you're sorry for kissing her when she isn't mad, it'll be like kicking a dead possum. You'll open up a stench that'll go on for miles. Great analogy. Well, actually it was oddly comforting. Because it sounded like something his dad would say. And he was right. He took a deep breath and some of the tension released from his shoulders. It was Ray. If he needed to apologize, he would. He had screwed up with her plenty of times over the years, and she had always been quick to forgive. But on the chance that the kiss had meant nothing to her, he didn't want to mess things up more than they were already.
It had all been a joke. It had to have been. Her heart had soared with that kiss even as her face burned because of the presence of his family. But afterward Chase had not said or done one thing to indicate that it had meant anything to him. She wanted to cry but wouldn't allow it on the grounds that she had no reason. It was only more proof that nothing had changed for him. The kiss had been one of his goofy moments that in the past may have meant nothing to her either. Time to get over this crush she'd developed. She had spent the last 5 days avoiding him so she could get her heart close enough to being on the same page as her head. They were friends, and it looked as if they were destined to remain that way. Because if neither of the kisses she and Chase had shared so far made him want a deeper relationship with her, nothing would. Rachel took a sip of the too sweet fruit punch as she watched the activity going on around her. This being her first office party, she hadn't known what to expect, but it definitely wasn't this. People who showed up every other day of the year in business attire were wearing some of the most outrageously gaudy Christmas sweaters she had ever seen. When the party started, one of the 2 punch bowls had been labeled spiked. She was pretty sure both now contained alcohol. Sandy had warned her the party would get wild and last into the night. Rachel had no intention of staying until the end. In fact, she was ready to find Chase, snap a picture with Santa, and head back to South Carolina. She skirted the conga line, snaking its way down the hallway, peeking inside each office door that was open. Chase was standing with a less celebratory group in the corner of the third one she tried. She hungrily took in the sight of his face. As crazy as it sounded, she had missed it. It had been less than a week. Well, it wasn't that she hadn't seen him. She just hadn't allowed herself to really look at him. That makes no sense. She forced a breath out. Nothing in her life made sense anymore. As soon as Chase saw her, he made a beeline right for her. You looking for me? You promised your mama a picture with Santa. Alarm shot through her when his shoulders slumped and he looked down at the floor. Unless now isn't a good time? It isn't that. When I said we'd have it done here at work, I didn't know Jay would end up playing the part of Santa Claus. We could always head to the mall early tomorrow and have it done there as usual. He had a pleading look in his eyes, but the last thing she wanted to do was spend time with him alone. Hopefully she could get over her infatuation with the man soon, but she wasn't there yet. Jay's not so bad once you get to know him. And the mall will be horrible this close to Christmas. Let's just get it done while we have the chance. His brow wrinkled and his bottom lip poked out, making him look like a pouty little boy. Good grief. No one said we had to get them together. You can go to the mall if you want to. I'm having mine made here, and then I'm going home. She spun on her heel to head to Jay's office. A tug on her elbow halted her steps. He looked contrite this time when she glanced up at him. I'm sorry. It's just you know what Ma is going to do with this picture. Just the thought of Jay Gossett's face having a spot in our family album for all eternity. He exaggerated a shiver and then smiled at her. He's not that bad, Chase. We've become friends over the past few days. It was true. Now that the worry of him cornering her for a date was gone, they had been able to fall into a comfortable friendship that had helped ease her tension this week. Tension caused by Chase. Ray, I'm just picking. Let's go get that picture. Anything to end this torture. It had never been this awkward between the two of them. Right now she'd be willing to do just about anything to turn the clock back, and to have never even suggested they enter that mistletoe kissing challenge. No one waited in line when they got to where the pictures were being made. One of the guys from accounting sat in Jay's lap, making goofy faces while Sandy snapped pictures. Sandy looked over her shoulder at Rachel and grinned. Girl, I wasn't sure if you were going to show up, but I'm glad you did. I didn't think about having someone to take my picture with Santa, and you know I don't trust just anyone with this equipment. Can you snap a quick one after I do you too? Why don't I do yours first? Sandy carefully handed the camera to her and glanced over Rachel's shoulder. Hey, Chase. Didn't mean to be rude by not speaking. It's okay. Rachel almost rolled her eyes. She could read both of them. Sandy had been put out with him for not letting Rachel know he's madly in love with her, because Sandy was still adamant that it was true. And judging by the low tone of Chase's voice, he was back to pouting. She waited for Sandy to take her place. Jay wrapped his arms around her waist and smiled as he whispered something to her. Whatever he said put a big, cheesy grin on Sandy's face just as Rachel snapped the picture. She checked the image on the screen. Perfect. After handing the camera back to Sandy, she took her turn on Santa's lap. Jay put his arms around her and whispered in her ear. Wanna make him jealous? She turned to look at him. Trust me, that's not possible. I don't know, I'd say mission already accomplished. Look at him. He didn't look jealous to her. He looked like a spoiled kid who didn't get his way. Chase, did you change your mind? No, but I thought maybe you had. What is that supposed to mean? She didn't ask. She just wanted to snap this picture and get home because his mood seemed to be contagious. Jay held his arm out wide. Come on, Chase. There's always room for one more on Santa's lap. Chase didn't even respond. He walked around to stand behind them. Sandy snapped a picture and then checked it on the camera display. Let me take that again, and this time, y'all smile. She snapped another and then nodded, but Rachel could tell by her expression that she wasn't satisfied. On a whim, Rachel kissed Jay on the cheek. Thanks, Santa. He gave her a cheeky grin. Anytime. She followed Chase out, but when he stalked off back in the direction of the party, she headed for the exit. Hopefully, his mood would be gone before tomorrow, or she'd be skipping karaoke night with his family. If this kept up, she might be better off taking her chances in New York.
Bump. Chase banged his head against the wall of his bedroom. Bump. Bump. He did it a couple more times for good measure. Rachel would be there within the next half hour for karaoke, and he needed to get his mind straight before he saw her again. Everything he had done wrong in the past week paraded through his head on a continuous loop. Hopefully this would be the last time. He'd like to forget the whole mess. First on the list, him kissing her in front of his family. He should have either not done it or had the dreaded let's be more than friends talk with her first. Second, when she tried to act like it hadn't been a big deal, he had let her, even though he could tell it had bothered her. And then last night with Jay, his head hit the wall again. Chase had seen red last night, and it had nothing to do with Jay's Santa suit. Rachel noticed and she hadn't been too happy about it. How did she expect him to feel when she snuggled up in the guy's lap? Oh right, Chase was only her friend. He wasn't supposed to feel anything. Bump. She had been mad at him in the past. Before, he would have just talked to Ray and everything would be okay afterward. Why couldn't he do the same thing now? He rubbed his fingers against the sore spot on his forehead as he opened his bedroom door. Jolene stepped out of her room across the hall the same time he did. What have you been doing in there? I don't know what you're talking about. I kept hearing a banging noise. Her gaze traveled up to his forehead. I didn't hear anything. He hurried on downstairs, and she followed. When they got to the bottom, she turned toward the kitchen and he headed outside to wait for Ray. He wondered how much Jolene knew. Probably everything. Hopefully she wasn't in the kitchen telling the rest of his family he had been using his skull as a hammer. As soon as Ray pulled up, he walked out to greet her. He was determined to fix this rift between them before karaoke night started, but as soon as he opened the car door and she stepped out, one look at her had his train of thought jumping tracks and heading in another direction. She had on a 50s-style dress, red with white polka dots that looked like it came right off the I Love Lucy show, with matching red pumps. Her hair was pinned up and her lips were painted a deep red. Years of him and his siblings one-upping each other had them trying to outdo each other on karaoke night. He and Ray had one song that they did together every year. When Belva and Grayson got together, they picked a different duet for their signature song, and after the first year when they came dressed for the part, the competition was on. The way Rachel looked right now, they would win tonight. You look amazing. Thanks. I see you decided not to dress for the occasion. Even with her red lips pressed in a disappointed line, he still wanted to kiss her. How could he have forgotten? He looked down to see what he was wearing. Blue jeans and a ratty-looking sweatshirt. I wasn't thinking. I'll go up and change. She nodded once, then turned to go into the house. Ray, wait. I need to apologize for the way I acted last night. It was uncalled for and I'm sorry. Her shoulders relaxed. He really did feel sorry for the tension he had caused. In fact, can we just hit the reset button on that kiss? You keep telling me you're fine, but I know it hasn't been fine all week. I want things to be right between us. She looked up at him then. That sounds like a good idea. I never should have suggested it. Wait, what? That's not. Chase, you are the best friend I've ever had and I feel like I've ruined everything. He touched his chest. No, it was my fault. His heart pounded. This was not how it was supposed to go. It doesn't matter. She reached up and pecked his cheek. Her thumb rubbed against the spot, probably trying to eliminate lipstick residue, but it felt like she was wiping away something else. What just happened? In trying to fix things, he had royally screwed them up. He should have banged his head against his bedroom wall a few more times. And harder. Maybe it would have knocked some sense into him so he could figure this mess out and get out of this friend zone for good.
Rachel looked on along with everyone else as Belva half-heartedly resisted her husband's advances as they sang, and acted out the words to Baby, It's Cold Outside. Of course, she seemed to give in to Grayson's wooing by the end of the song. Everyone laughed when Zane gestured to Belva's protruding belly and hollered out, You see what giving in will get you? The youngest Spencer had caused a buzz tonight by inviting two of his classmates, both girls and both dressed almost identically in their red velvet, baby doll-style dresses. Was he dating them both? Why were they dressed alike? Why had no one heard of either of them before? Rachel had heard the same whispered questions from various family members throughout the night. All right, it's Chase and Rachel's turn. Ma Spencer's announcement pulled Rachel from her wandering thoughts, and brought them back to the one thing she had been trying all night not to think about, her and Chase. Relief had coursed through her when Chase offered a reset button. Unfortunately, the feeling had lasted all of 5 seconds. Now as she watched him heading for the mic in his vintage suit and gelled hair, she couldn't deny her feelings any longer. She still wanted more. Chase met her within the circle of his family, and they each grabbed a mic. As soon as the music started, her body relaxed. They had been singing that holiday feeling together for years, had perfected the routine and the words. It would be as easy as breathing. She started them off with a cheesy line about the weather. That's how she had always thought of this song, cheesy and unromantic. But when he got to the part about lips that were warm and sweet while wearing that dreamy look in his eyes, heat shot down her middle. She stumbled over the word mistletoeing, which wasn't even a word to begin with. And she had never paid attention before to how many times kissing came up in the words of the song. Ma Spencer clapped louder than anyone else. That's y'all's best performance to date. Steve Lawrence and A.D. Gorm couldn't have done it any better. That was all Chase. Her heart was still beating hard in her ears over his performance, the passionate way he looked at her, that spin and unexpected dip at the end. Whoa, baby. Maybe it was relief from the conversation we had earlier. That thought took the wind right out of her sails. Where did Zane go? Jolene's question had everyone looking in the direction of the dining room door where the boy had exited right after Chase and Rachel's song started up. As if on cue, Zane's two friends stood, each grabbed a mic, and one of them fiddled with the karaoke machine. All eyes were on them and the familiar tune to Here Comes Santa Claus begun to play. This was one they usually did as a group with everyone singing. When it had been suggested earlier, Zane had declared it too childish and they had picked something else. At the sound of Zane's voice singing over the karaoke speaker, everyone turned in unison toward the dining room door and then the room erupted with laughter. He gyrated his way into the living room wearing a dark wig and a white 70s-style pantsuit, a bedazzler's dream, complete with bell-bottoms. Elvis. His mama got down on her knees in front of him, her hands over her heart, playing the part of an adoring fan, which wasn't too far from the truth. The rest of the women followed suit with laughter and fainting acts, except for Zane's two friends who were backing him up with ohs and ahs. Chase had to help his mama off the floor when it was over. She hollered out a request as she rubbed her knees. Sing Heartbreak Hotel. Zane plopped down on the couch beside her. Ma, that ain't even a Christmas song. Well, do Blue Christmas then. That's a tearjerker. Zane's two backup singers had gathered their things and came and stood in front of him and his mama. Thanks for having us, Mrs. Spencer. We had a lovely time but we need to get home. You girls come back any time. Zane stood and walked them to the door. Every eye in the room was on him, including Rachel's. Both girls kissed him on the cheek before walking out the door. So, is he dating both of them? Chase's whisper in her ear caused her to shiver. Or maybe neither of them. She rubbed the chill bumps from her arms. Chase wrapped his arm around her. Are you cold? Not really. Guess it's about time for me to head home too. She started gathering the scattered dishes around her from the snacks and hot chocolate they had brought into the living room. Chase placed his hand on her arm. Don't go. There's no one at your house and it's the holidays. Why don't you spend the rest of it here? Not a good idea. She had spent days here before while her parents were out of town. Belva's old bed was still in the room she'd shared with Jolene. But that was before Rachel's feelings for Chase had become muddled. I didn't bring anything to wear, and I'll be spending tomorrow night here anyway. Your mama invited me to spend Christmas Eve here. I'm sure Jolene can find you something to sleep in, and you can run to your house for more clothes tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow, but tonight I need time to myself. She'd spend Christmas Eve night here because she told Ma Spencer she would. But after Christmas, Rachel would be distancing herself from Chase and his family. At least for a while.
Chase tossed the basketball up toward the ceiling, caught it, and then tossed it again. He could hear his family stirring downstairs as they made brunch. It was meant to be a family affair. Usually, he'd be right in the thick of things, but he needed time alone this morning. Time with just him and the Lord. Ma planned so many activities for the family this time of year. There was nothing wrong with it, but Chase wondered if any of the rest were left feeling a little exhausted like he felt right now. The mindless effort of tossing the ball along with the rhythmic thump of it hitting his palms helped to center his thoughts. Lord, I've consulted my family, and I've tried to work it out on my own. I've prayed for years about my feelings for Rachel. Holy Father, where do I go from here? How do I move forward? A tap at his door interrupted the prayer. Zane poked his head in, his hair plastered at odd angles on one side. Ma said it's time you joined us. And Ray's here. He finished his prayer with help me, Lord. Amen. He hadn't expected her this early. She hadn't even come by the day before. The Spencers had spent the day preparing for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, baking, last-minute shopping, and trying to get ahead on farm chores. There hadn't been a grand plan for a family event, but considering she was alone for the holidays, he'd expected to see her. Chase rolled from his bed and placed the ball in the corner between his dresser and the wall. He slipped on an old pair of flip-flops and headed for the kitchen. Ray was the only one dressed. The rest looked like they just rolled out of bed, which wasn't too far from the truth. He put his arm around her shoulders and watched as she lifted pancakes from the griddle. "Need some help? You can add the chocolate chips." Using a ladle, she poured small circles on the hot griddle, and he sprinkled mini chocolate chips over each one. "I missed you yesterday. What did you end up doing?" She looked up at him. "Mostly, I caught up on some reading. And I talked to my parents. They still want you to move to New York?" "Yeah. I told them I'm still thinking about it." His heart stuttered. He knew Rachel. A month ago, her answer would have been a flat-out no. Remembering his prayer from a little bit ago, he kept his reaction to himself. He had left their relationship in God's hands, and he wasn't going to pick it back up. But Lord, a part of me might die if she leaves.
Rachel leaned back against the kitchen counter and took another sip of water as her fingers smoothed over the necklace Chase had given her. Tomorrow, they would open the big gifts. For her, that would consist of the one from whomever drew her name, one from Ma Spencer, and the larger of the two she would get from Chase. Tonight's gift from him was supposed to have been the small one. She had given him a book and he had given her this necklace. Granted, it came in a small box, but the white gold heart with the yellow gold infinity symbol intertwined on one side of it cost more than the book. A lot more. He had basically given her a symbol of his undying love. Did he even know what it meant? Doubtful. She took another sip of water and stared at the mistletoe hanging in the middle of the door casing between the dining room and kitchen. Mistletoe she had hung there Thanksgiving night when they had decorated the house for Christmas. The weekend after it was hung, Wade had even given her a peck on the cheek when they'd both tried to use the door at the same time. She wouldn't be caught there again. Christmas is almost over. Just one more day and then you can hide away for a while, at least until you go back to work after New Year's. She still wasn't keen on moving to New York, but maybe she would book herself a flight and spend what was left of the year with her parents. It had been a few years since she got to watch the ball drop in Times Square. Might be fun. Rachel set her glass in the sink. It was time to head upstairs to get some sleep. Hopefully Jolene had slowed down on her snoring by now. She flipped the light switch. Plenty of moonlight shone through the kitchen for her to see where she was going. The dining room would be a different story, but she could use the wall for a guide with no problem. She hadn't been paying attention and had run into, it wasn't the wall. Her hand smoothed across firm chest muscles. "Ray, what are you doing up?" With the light coming through the window behind her, she could see Chase plain as anything. "I couldn't sleep. I came down for a drink of water." "Me too." He didn't move from the doorway so she couldn't move around him. And he still held her upper arms, rubbing unnerving circles with his thumbs. He pointed up. "Know where we're standing?" She didn't look up. Didn't have to. They were standing right where she had said she wouldn't be caught again. Under the mistletoe. He lowered his head until his lips were only an inch or two away from hers. "You know what that means." "I have no choice. It's the rules." His lips joined hers with barely controlled passion. This time his kiss was slow and thorough with no one watching. No one to interrupt until he was finished. All thoughts vanished until the kiss ended, then they all rushed in at lightning speed. Rachel grabbed the one foremost in her mind. "Do you still want to be friends?" "Yes, I want to be your friend. I will always be your friend for as long as you let me." He sounded exasperated. Tears stung the back of her eyes. She dipped her head, averting them so he wouldn't see. Unexpectedly, his fingertips touched her chin. She closed her eyes. He applied a little pressure, as if he wanted her to look at him, but he didn't force her. She felt him draw closer but still didn't open her eyes or lift her face up toward his. Then he whispered close to her ear. "But what if I want to be more than that too?" Her eyes flew open and she looked at him, trying to read the feelings behind the question in his eyes. "For real?" she asked. He leaned his forehead against hers, his soft breath brushing her face. "For real?"
Chase had never been to New York before. In fact, he'd never visited outside the southeast region of the United States. But when Ray invited him to come here to watch the ball drop at Times Square, there was never any doubt that he would go. But it wasn't the town or the event that made this trip special. The change in their relationship had him wanting to spend every moment with her. Standing behind Ray with his arms wrapped around her, he tightened his hold. She leaned closer, and he kissed her jaw just below her ear. The noise around them was deafening. He'd never even imagined being in a crowd this size. It would be unnerving without Ray in his arms. When they had arrived the day before, her parents had seemed shocked to find out that they were a couple. The shock had quickly turned to suspicion. Her father wanted to know how long they had been in a relationship. He had cornered Chase again in private, making no bones about asking what kind of relationship they shared. The memory still disappointed Chase. They should know their daughter better than that. But he had patiently answered Mr. Anthony's questions, and then he had plainly laid out his intentions toward Rachel, including a big question of his own. He'd thought the man was going to have a heart attack. Even though he had been assured that it wasn't true, Chase still wondered if the Anthonys thought a farmer's son wasn't good enough for their daughter. It didn't matter. He was determined to hold on to her for the rest of their lives. The clock perched high above the crowd began ticking off the last minute of the year. When it got down to the last 10 seconds, the muddled roar changed into a collective voice of over 1 million people. Even with the much larger scale of this event, it reminded him of the countdown from their first kiss. Rachel turned in his arms and smiled as they counted together. He pulled her as close as the layers of clothing they wore to ward off the cold would allow. When the countdown ended and shouts of "Happy New Year" began, he lowered his lips to hers and closed his eyes. As they kissed, the roar of the crowd around them disappeared and their future lined up, marching through his mind in a flash. He could picture them building a life together, raising a family, and then growing old wrapped up in each other's arms just as they were now. And he'd never wanted anything more. For more information about Andrea Boyd and her books, visit AndreaBoyd11.com.